So Brad was referring me to scores. Today is Thursday, November 3rd. This is our staff meeting. We're just talking about level not nonsense right at the moment. Brad, well, I mean, is there any time we're not talking about nonsense? Actually, we're all talking about serious things, is it? But we have to soothe ourselves with nonsense. Is that how it works? We include therapy and human humor and
You either
irony,
get us, either get
irony
us laughing,
especially.
you get us laughing, or you get us crying.
Yeah. So, so we're talking about Brad is a fan of Martin Armstrong, who's an economist, and of course I've followed Armstrong for a long time because uh, he was one of the first people to say demographics and everything, right? So all economists have a way of in order to make a decision in a field like economics, you have to have decision criteria. This tends to be two directions: short, medium, and long term, or ultra long term, right? Which is how I look at it. Or you look at it as, let's say, some class. You prefer the investor class, the middle class, the excuse me, the political class, the investor class, the middle class, the working class, etc., or the underserved. And so there's a sort of distribution among economists and how they do this. But and so you have a time horizon, right, and a class dimension, which I should do it like they're both horizontal, right? So that fucking, let's do it as a horizontal time. Luke, I'm just watching your eyes, see if I can fuck with you. I mean, you don't realize this. You realize I am trying to just fuck with you right now, right? Because I'm watching your eyes. Anyway, Luke has very slit little eyes this morning because he's got all these lights in front of him. I only have one. Brandon's are all sort of environmental, right? You have environmental lights mostly, yeah. So and you can't, and the thing about picking on Luke is it doesn't ever fucking work, right? That's part of the irony of it. Anyway, so there's a horizontal line for time and a vertical line for class. And so this combination tends to play out in who you're in every, because every economist, in order to make an assertion, has a choice. He can either develop a habit of addressing one or so one sort of part of this graph, or he can do what I do, which is enumerate positions on the graph, right? I just go through, well, it's good for this, good for this, good for this, good for this. So the problem with this guy is that he's libertarian, mostly, and I love to pick on libertarians, right? I mean, it's just, well, picking everybody, but picking on libertarians is just better because they're nerdier. And so there's actually an argument there. And so because there's actually an argument, it's kind of fun to tease them because it exposes the argument. When you pick on a conservative, right, you're picking on an anti-intellectual position most of the time. And you're on the left, you're talking about a pseudo-intellectual position most of the time. So you have these wonderful clown world problems whenever you're talking about any of these given people on the political triangle. Anyway, so Armstrong is one of those guys that he's in the libertarian camp, which is it's actually what he cares about is investors and the middle class, right? That's his sort of place. And so his policy recommendations always favor them. And I'm like, yeah, but what about everybody else? And his implied answer is they'll do better or they'll get by. But I'm like, well, that doesn't mean they think the system's legitimate if they're just getting by, or they might do better sometimes. They'd like to be the target of policy once in a while. They'd at least like to be considered in this spectrum. So anyway, so as an economist who's part of the long ultra long term, which is demographics and everything, right? He's fantastic. But as a commentarian, like a guy who writes commentary, he's just a fucking clowny libertarian. right? And so I just get, and he's got that self-righteousness thing, which is what is this? The self-righteous, I'm right, is there, but then you get the conservatives, and they're self-righteous but despondent, and then you get the left crazy pseudo-intellectuals, and they're overconfident. They're overconfident and self-righteous, and it's like this interesting relationship between confidence and self. In other words, success, failure, confidence, lack of confidence, self-righteousness, and which part of the political triangle you're on. And I don't know. I just find it all. Aren't you guys in a position where you just fucking laugh at everything now? Because it just seems like a clown world to me, doesn't it?
We are surrounded by absurdity regularly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so. I don't know. Anyways, that was my little rant there on. It's probably some insight in that if you were actually to graph it out, how the libertarian left, right, and the time biases and the confidence, lack of confidence, overconfidence, and right, and then the universalism of self-righteousness. It just fascinates me. It's fascinating to me. All right, so that was my warm up. Sorry, we were talking and I was starting to go on. Brand says you might want to record this, so I recorded it. Anyway, so fuck, dude, there's a lot of shit going on in the world right now. It's fucking entertaining. The question is it inspiring?
For who? I don't think they're taking demographics and everything seriously enough, because like there's a demographic for YouTube and a demographic for Twitter and a demographic for Facebook, and they're all bottoming out on the aggregate biases of all those demographics. Yes. Instagram is females, right? And so on. Twitter's like angry,
the confessional,
disagreeable.
Confessional of the psychotic.
Like TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, it's fucking insane. TikTok it's hysterical. I mean, if you want to, I love the reason social media is so interesting is because it's like these incredible social science experiments being run. And if you ever needed to, or ever any question about the relative insanity of the female mind, just spend an hour on TikTok.
The only fun part is when there are conflicts. So the what is it? The fractionation of everybody has been kind of annoying for me. They used to all be in one place fighting one another and you could watch. Now they're all stroking one another.
Oh, I see. So the Facebook model was probably beneficial, but as it fragments, it becomes it just as political feedback becomes verticalized, horizontalized, right? I mean, into your vertical, right? So what you're saying is social dysfunction becomes verticalized into each of these.
I don't think social media platforms can be functional and assist in people moving through this place unless they're commons. They haven't been able to prove otherwise.
Yeah, that's basically Musk's argument, right?
I think he's trying to demonstrate that case using Twitter, and the way he's going to do it is to universal, meaning move all transactions that you can have. Like you could be able to live on Twitter, make your money, make transactions, so on and so forth, videos, all that. So he wants to capture everything and see if he can bootstrap that signal. Well, he's not doing it. He's doing a bang up job at it. I don't think there's anyone who could do it better than he's doing it currently.
Okay, I love his goddamn sense of humor. I mean, we'd see what he did to Cortez yesterday.
Yes, yeah. He is a funny artist for sure.
And it's funny to me that they're happy to use ridicule and sarcasm, but they can't
when it suits them.
When it suits them, but they can't stand it when it's used against them.
Well, yeah. You can't hit me, I'm a girl.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same fucking thing. Oh Jesus, I gotta capture that one.
But you can't argue with me because I'm right.
It's worse
Right
because he
back to
uses
that.
every excuse now because you can't hit me, I have glasses. You can't hit me because I have blue hair.
Well, that was really
Yeah,
good.
so it's always a group interest they use to defend themselves while claiming there are no such thing as group interests.
Say that again.
Well, it's always a group interest or a category interest that they use to defend themselves. Don't hit me because I'm a girl, while at the same time claiming that group interests don't exist.
Yes.
They're always speaking for their group. They're speaking for the force they can rally, not themselves.
Right.
They actually, this is Luke hit on a beautiful way of framing it, but what it is they all believe they have what do you call it? No, solipsism.
They have a universal instinct.
They have universal instinct where they think they're the universal.
Correct.
Right. So that's we call that the cognitive bias, where you think you're the average person.
Well, they're saying everyone feels this way about this.
Right. Which is why they react to deviation so strongly, because you're not deviating from their group preference, you're deviating from a universal preference.
Say that again.
I mean, that's why they respond to deviation so strongly, because you're not deviating from their group preference, you're deviating from the universal preference.
Correct. It's a brilliant form of psychosis, right? I mean, no, you think about it. It's evolution making you think you're average and that your opinion is universal, and therefore you're not offending me, you're offending everyone, and therefore I'm righteous. When it's just me you're offending. Right? It's brilliant. It's a brilliant coping mechanism. Because what are they trying to do?
Childish.
Well, it's childish because they're trying to, because it's another aspect of evasion of responsibility.
It assumes many false things. That one, like you're not an animal, right? You don't have biases or instincts, and that they're infallible because like they're going, well, I'm a human, so my feelings are infallible.
Yeah.
Well, that's not how this place works.
Oh shit. If you actually think it through, like it's one thing to just go through life and say, well, why are they like that? Or that doesn't make sense. But if you actually break it down into first principles, it's fucking ridiculous.
It's also obvious
Yeah, I guess.
why they're like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just I don't know. I have a topic I want to make sure we've opened the conversation up for topics before I go into mine. But yeah, we have all sorts of crazy shit going on. I mean, the Musk thing is, I'm having a blast with it every day because I actually feel safe stating an intellectually neutral position or stating a truth free of slander and emotional whatever. I just consider, and I don't feel so assaulted anymore. The other thing I like is that I'm getting it's like I'm not shadow banned and shadow blocked from all these people and others aren't. That's the only thing I really notice is somebody sabotaged the naughty word index, right? So that the day Musk took over, the N word could get out, right? So that was an internal.
They probably reversed it to an earlier date, like they took off the later.
I suppose it's possible. I think they just somebody sabotaged it myself.
So it's gone. You think it's gone?
Well, because they fixed it immediately, right? but it's possible you're right. All right, they could have rolled back the index.
Oh, I don't know.
No,
I was
I'm just
speculating.
for the audience. I'm just saying that you have to do something because it's not human. I mean, the N word is automatically. I mean, I get the word idiot filtered for the
It could have someone there could have baited people into like opened up the things that used to be able to get you banned and baited people into doing it. I don't know how clever. I don't know how clever they are.
Well, of course they're doing that now, right? I mean, that's
yes. The Donald Trump is dead story
Yeah.
is kind of
which
like one of
was
those.
that was funny.
I thought it was funny too. I thought
That
it
was
was funny
fucking
too.
hysterical.
But they use it to make a moral point, which is annoying.
Yeah. But so like you have to, you know, because what I saw was the only thing I've noticed is shadow banning has seems to have been rolled back, and the other thing is that either someone sabotaged the index or they rolled back the index. My suspicion is a sabotage, because I've bought tech companies, and that's the kind of shit people do.
You'd know better than me.
So, and then I love these people who say, "Well, he should do this day one, day two." I've bought tech companies. You know how long it takes before you actually can understand what the fuck's going on inside them? It's like 6 months.
That sounds right.
Like you can do a hard crash in 30 days. If you bring in a team, you could document the whole thing on a bunch of whiteboards, right? So at least the crash team, right, the acquisition team, which is what he's got there, at least they understand what's going on in the business. And then you just take out your list and you say, okay, we've got these problems to solve, and you go at it. Well, that's what they're doing right now. But I mean, Twitter is not a complex business, right? The problem is we don't know the internal tool set. So we know the website, it's fucking trivial, right? But we don't know the internal tool set. And it's like Facebook, all the hard stuff is managing the advertisers, right? I mean, advertising revenue. That's where all the sophistication is. And the billing and the accounting and all the other shit.
Huh.
And then there's a whole bunch of internal tools all internal tools that are metrics and measurements. And then there's release processes and procedures and allocation of whatever and where everything is in its development cycle. And then you have all the nonsense workers, women. I got a little out of loop for that one, but I was hoping I would get more than that.
Well,
I set that up. I just set that up perfectly, and you guys didn't give me shit for it.
it's most of the men too.
Okay.
Well, they're trying to write logic for the female interpretation of the data flow.
So it's really what they're doing is fruitless.
Right. So it's going to be nothing but overhead.
Right. Because it's impossible. So write a logic for an illogic. What's funny is this devolutionary, the female method is devolutionary. Since there's no logic to it except offense, all you do is consistently increase the scope of offense. I mean, that's the evolutionary path, which is what we see, right? If you're rewarded for finding offenses, you will never run out of finding offenses. So, what were you just saying? You said, and I was saying you go in through and you document the whole thing. So it takes a while, but there's all these useless workers in there that he's aware of, and there's some number of engineers, and he's got to find out which people are broken, and it's obviously most of them, right? So he's got to find. You can't just fire everybody. You have to incrementally turn over, and in the process of incrementally turning over, some number of people just adapt. A far larger number than you'd think. I bought you Brandon's.
Well, I'm trying to find where can we just fire everybody? Because I'm under the impression like the economic, the education sector, we can just fire everybody and the chaos will produce something better.
Well, you fire the reason education doesn't matter is because you could run a seminar on how to teach a class.
Yes,
It doesn't. It's really not really good. What?
because it's a skill.
It's a skill.
Mhm.
But those could be. It's a talent. Teaching is a talent. The the discipline of day-to-day management of it is a skill, but it's basically project management. The problem with teaching is that you have to keep mental track of the place of each student in the lesson, the lesson or the curriculum, basically. So all a teacher does is modify lessons to try to move the group forward, right? Somehow. So that's what they basically do. So if you have a curriculum set of points, your lesson can do this much of it, this much of it, this much of it, this much of it, this much. So that's what a teacher does. But it's just a project management. And that's why when people say it's not they get a lot of time off, it's not really true. Because it's like managing any other thing else, is that the figuring out that stuff out and the teaching of it are the teaching is time consuming, and so is the figuring out. And so when we put teachers in school for 6 hours, they only have 2 hours to do all that. It's what happens is they end up doing it at night. Right? So that's why teaching is the profession that it is that the teachers have to spend an extraordinarily high number of hours because unless they're in the college world. The college world, or how I was educated from 4th grade on, is that teachers taught. You went from teacher to teacher when not my school, right? You starting in, I think it was 5th grade, certainly 6th, and so that person didn't have to deal with lesson plans for a million topics across all these people in all these sectors. So that was the big difference. Whereas it's a little easier when you've got kindergartners or something. And then you don't have to have a teacher teaching 6 hours a day or 7 hours a day. They can teach 4 hours a day and work on lesson planning or whatever else they got to work on the rest. Does that make sense?
For clarity, you're talking about competent teachers, not the average teacher.
Yes.
Which is why I said we could fire everybody.
Well, I mean, this is the argument that we have.
I'm just playing.
No, I know, but I want to repeat for the audience. The evidence is teaching can be taught in 3 months of seminars and 9 months of in-room practice. In other words, what do you call it? Apprenticeship. And that you could, if you're an assistant teacher for like a year or two, that's all there is. So we can mass manufacture teachers like till the cows come home, especially if we use adults instead of young people. There's people with life experience.
And
I think teaching should be
skills. Go ahead, Luke, please.
I was going to say, I think teaching should be a retirement job in a lot of ways.
I agree.
But you hear often, my dad's side of the family, they were all teachers, right? So I grew up with teachers complaining about the world of teaching on a regular basis, right? So, one of the big complaints is you see all these professional athletes making tons of money and teachers making nothing, right? I'd love to see teachers making the same kind of money as professional athletes, but I want the bar of entry to be just as high.
Yeah, exactly.
To become a teacher as it is to become a professional athlete. So,
are almost all those administrative type white collar jobs, retirement jobs, better at managing people, separated by generations? You have demonstrated merit, you're worth, I don't know, 1,000.
You mean public service jobs?
Yeah, I mean, you can't graduate college and be put into one of those jobs with a credential. You do a poor job. We've been demonstrating that recently.
Yep.
So, I don't know, firing everybody and putting retired people with competence in their place seems the maneuver.
Also,
It'd be a good idea if the retired people weren't all boomers.
yeah. I'm like, what? Oh,
Well, I think we have more people to choose from that have, what do you call it? Enough knowledge. Not that I wouldn't just use like YouTube. I'm going to make people teachers. There's just a bunch of things that you need to know and then abilities you need to have, and then you can act in the world.
well,
So institutionalized teaching stuff for.
I think the hard part is that we're still using 19th century teaching methods when we have computers. And I guess what I've learned from people is when I say gaming, I mean simulating. Right? I don't mean playing a computer game. I mean that the example they use in Connecticut here, which is one I'm familiar with because they do it here, is they run a police dispatch. And so the game, the simulation, is the roles in the dispatch in the police department, right? And so they play this simulation, and the computer is feeding them, just like I don't know, you guys, when they say they're going to play war games, it's mostly sitting at a kitchen table, and messages coming in.
Right.
So I mean, I haven't been to one since when are we doing this? The 80s. So it's been a long time. So I'm sure there's more advanced ways, but it isn't complicated like some advanced. It's not like the War Games movie where there's these boards, right? It's more like you're taking notes at a kitchen table, and these people randomly come in with news bulletins, right? Where information, and they tell you that this has happened, and they're asking you what to do. So the running simulations is pro-social, right? And it allows for different levels, like high achievers and other people can be watchers, right? I mean, it allows this whole game to go, and then you can switch around and play different roles. I think that stuff is wonderful, but then there's just plenty of things that can be taught by computer games, and I always bring up the example that every guy I know in Ukraine that speaks English learned it from playing computer games. Which is hysterical. I mean, Luke, didn't you tell me you learned something? Who was it? Oh, it was Martin.
I went to school. Yeah, my education is in game design and game theory and stuff like that. So that's the world I came from. I've been saying for years. People think game and they think fun, right? And it should be accurate for entertainment purposes. But a game is just an incentive engine with some mechanism for storing states and some sort of interface. That's all a game is. And so the incentives can be anything.
Yep.
Right. And so you can game anything.
Yeah, except social media has gamed social discourse, meaning it informs how interactions between people go, not the other way around.
Right.
So the destruction of norms on the informational commons, the social commons, because it's social media, the destruction of norms there has translated into a destruction of discourse in proximal and local levels. People scream at one another, call each other names, and so
we need the punch in the face. See, if you can just punch somebody in the face on the screen,
you can't hit them. They're girls.
What?
You can't hit them. They're girls.
Oh my God, have you seen that? Have you seen that German bar where the Turkish bouncer speaking Russian slaps that blonde chick? I unfortunately we don't have the first part, so we don't know what he's been saying to her to get her all wound, right?
No.
Right. So I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, but that was, I'm like, wow, but I didn't think that was very cool, right? But I'm in the minority compared of the online community, which thinks it was.
Because they've licensed the abuse of females against males, so when they get it, the males
exactly.
Right, exactly. Well, it's just being a chimpanzee.
Yeah.
That's it, right? Because what do? They clap and they throw shit.
Yes.
So I'm going to make the same case here again, though, that I've been trying to make recently. Is that we can't punch each other in the face anymore because we no longer have the norms that allow for that, right? Because we've pushed groups too close together. So we have groups now that would abuse that they won't practice restraint in the punching of somebody in the face, right? In the same environment as people that will practice restraint if you punch somebody in the face. So we can't have a norm that allows for punching somebody in the face, right? Now I'm using that because we can take that same thing and project it onto social media.
Yep.
Right? We can project that same thing onto social media. We have this platform where we can talk to each other, but we lose the norms there. Like you've been saying, we don't have the restraint of the people that will limit themselves to, exchanges in a manner that produces outcomes that are preferable, because they're all matched together with people that won't do that. So we have to protect ourselves against the lowest common denominator. We keep smashing all these people together. That's why globalism is so destructive for norms, because it smashes all these people together, and you lose the norms that are the coherence of the group,
right,
that allow for those practices within the group, right? So the groups that lose the ability to correct. You can't police that group anymore, or the group can't self-police anymore, because it loses the norms that support that self-policing.
Well, what's sick and twisted about it, of course, is that favors the feminine verbal.
All simulations that have incentive engines like social media have to inform norms and normalcy with the limits that they set. Meaning, on social media, your reputation is the property, and disputes for harms of that property need to be adjudicated, not fact checked. They need to be adjudicated.
Right. But even the problem with that is a reputation. Like, let's say somebody's reputation in the United States, that reputation is built in a different way than somebody's reputation in Vietnam.
Yes.
But because we're on the same platform, interacting the same way, we're paying the price. In the U.S., we're paying the price of the reputation building criteria of the Vietnamese, and they're paying the price of the reputation building criteria in the U.S. So even those elements start to disappear, and they move towards a more global median, which is false for everybody, right? It doesn't work for any of us.
I would make the case that currently the only language that offers the precision in law necessary to adjudicate disputes of a property of that kind is English.
Probably.
Meaning what we're offering is the universal algorithm for social media is that it must be pro-social, which means it must be in line.
Let's
must abide by the law.
But Luke's trying to make a very subtle point and I'm glad you brought up Vietnam, because Vietnam is one of the most criminal societies on earth, where, I mean, I used to complain about when I was younger, I would go to southern Italy, and if it can be stolen, if you can be, if they can play a monetary game with you or steal you or something, they will. I mean, it's pervasively criminal society, right? So this is where Banfield, Hop and Banfield come together and so this is the same problem. Southern Italy is still criminal and northern Italy is not, and so this is the big problem. But Vietnam is similar. If they can charge you extra money because you're a foreigner, or give you the wrong change back, or pickpocket you, or shake you down for money, right? Is that in Vietnam it will happen, right? And so it's a pervasively criminal society. So now let's go to the Islam, where lying for the benefit of your family is virtuous. So the Arab world is a pervasively criminal society like ours. We have this really high standard, but our high standard is truth before face, which is offensive to all these less developed peoples. So I wanted to work with this, Luke, because I want to test the hypothesis that there's no standard of measure. In other words, there is, truth and reciprocity are a thing, right? But that's different from norms and status within your community. Because in the Islamic world, it's family, right? And it's not only that, but in the East Asian world, it's family. In some parts, it's family and religion. And in some parts, it's well, I won't go through all the permutations because I'll go on a sidetrack. But the Musk's theory, which I think is right, is that we can have a universal standard of measure. In other words, a filter. But then on top of that, we can have cultural filters. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And will that work is what I'm asking. In other words, because you're asking two questions. I'm not trying to imply that social media will be more desirable if we do those things. What I'm saying is, how does that affect this phenomenon you're talking about in the social culture, given we can't punch each other in the face?
Right.
Because they said, so if have I done a good enough job to ask the question?
No, you are. So again, and the reason I bring this up is because we were talking about social media becoming a commons, right? Because it has to meet the criteria for a commons, and one of those criteria is exclusion. A common, any property that can't exclude is not a property, and therefore it can't be a common property. It can't be a commons, right? And so because of the incentive in social media to be as inclusive as possible, to capture as much audience as possible, it struggles with creating systems then that produce exclusion. It's a platform designed for inclusion, so it's always going to struggle with exclusion.
Yeah, but the platform designed for inclusion will end up with the feminine problem of
Yeah,
You just use social crime as the filter, meaning everyone's included here except criminals.
well, I mean, it works though, right? I mean, there's basically there you have what we call slurs, right? So that's just insulting people, right? Then there's you escalate from that. I never know how to do the order. You have things that are really offensive, like porn and child pornography and whatever, and gore and things that offend the disgust response, because the disgust response would interfere with the development of a child, right? That's really the point. You're trying to not normalize what the intuition tells us is disgust response, right? Or a thing that would inhibit you becoming a member of a family in the future, right? We don't want you to deviate because children are high investment, they're the highest investment. And so we don't want our investment to go bad. We don't want our children to die before us. We don't want them to become deviants and fail. Now we don't want them to select out of the reproductive chain, so that what we've done is we funded them, but they've made a dead end. So there's the content, the offensive content that's universal. Right? Now, am I okay with gore? Not really. Am I okay with accident videos and shooting videos? Absolutely. Right? I think the margins of humans are easy, but maybe I just want to filter that in and out. After that, that's like, now we go into, there's universally offensive. Now there's particularly offensive. A particularly offensive is a slur, right? I'm going to just call you a name or whatever like that, or tell your mother's ugly and wears combat boots, that kind of stuff. And then so that's universally, particularly, and a semi-particularly, and then there is the point of view, which is valuation, right? So that is that category of things where, well, you're on this part of the spectrum, I'm on this part of the political spectrum, and I'm in this part of the political spectrum, and therefore what you're saying is offensive to me. Now, that's an appeal for a trade or a denial of cooperation. A slur doesn't do anything, an insult, right? It's just rude. And then and it often can be used as a substitute in order to distract from a trade or a boycott. And then gore and disgust, it just pollutes the commons. Well, you're really just poisoning the well, right? And that's what literally it does. I'm watching your eyes to make sure I'm making my point. So we have gore and porn and child pornography. That's poisoning the well itself, right? You have slurs, which poisons the interactions, but also contributes to poison the world. But then there's natural conflict over political priorities, what we call point of view. That doesn't poison the well, does it?
No, lies do.
What lies do, right?
Well, so
You always get to
so
have
that's left. That's all of left.
right. So, trying to find my notes here. So we have the problem of lies between the slurs and the point of view, right? In other words, what I'm trying to say is Jim Rutt's categories of decorum, of content, which is the gore, decorum, which is slurs and cursing and stuff like that, and content or point of view is missing falsehood in your reciprocity. In other words, there's a category before another category before we get to the category of mere differences. Did that come across or not?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure lies aren't the worst.
Well, I think
you can detect for all the other things. They're traumatic.
Yeah, I'm just measuring it by the content, the cognitive density of the content.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm just going from in that order, the cognitive density of the content. Right.
I was doing severity of punishment in my head.
But again, if you remove the lies, you remove most points of view.
Well, that ends. Now you're getting. The reason I wanted to go here is because, well, you weren't here for it. Is I'm testing Luke's hypothesis, which I think is mostly correct, right? And my question here is, if you can filter universally offensive content, right? If you can filter slurs, and if you can filter lies and reciprocity, then what's left?
Cooperation,
or at least conflict, right? I mean, the conflict is
through time. Yeah, there's things to be hashed out.
No, I would argue that conflict can fall into cooperation.
Yeah,
because how you navigate it could be a form of cooperation. It's not
that's what
opposed to
Brandon meant. Yes, I agree. Conflict is just how the fuck do you know?
Right. So to circle back to the original point, why is punching somebody in the face in the United States a crime?
It shouldn't be.
It has to be.
No, but explain, because Martin wasn't here.
Right. So because with a homogenous population that practices proportionality and restraint, you would not need to make punching somebody in the face a crime, under the conditions of it's a corrective measure, it's policing the commons, things like that, right? But if you have groups in close proximity or mashed together that one group does practice proportionality and restraint and another group doesn't practice proportionality and restraint, then you have to make that practice itself a crime. Otherwise, it's being abused, right?
But and the beautiful thing about that is, what I'm just going to use the black violence versus white non-violence type, or Asians. Asians are probably
right.
So let's take the Asians and the blacks. Is that the black violence is, if you watch how they do it, it's brutal. White violence is generally to break contact. In other words, subdue, stop. Right, and
right.
Asians avoid conflict, right? So what you're saying is that the minute there's somebody worse than you, right? They stop. You can't use physical in order to settle a matter, right? You can't. You have to outlaw all physical. So you have. And so are you saying the same thing applies to speech?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying the same thing applies to speech, but it applies in basically in all methods of undermining. It applies.
Yes.
Right. And so what we're seeing, what we see on social media is that same phenomenon occurring with argument, with what we're calling, what do we call on social media a crime then? Because what my group considers a crime is going to be different than what another group considers a crime. So we end up outlawing things that for our group would work to police the commons, but it can't be allowed on the platform because it would be abused by another group. That's what I mean when I say these platforms tend to drift in the direction of censorship and in the direction of control. It's because it's got such a broad, inclusive audience. It includes too many people. If you have
anything that tries to be anything dependent on the maximization of the customer base falls into the democratic problem of reduction to the worst, right? The most common.
Right. Yeah.
And so that which is captured in the alt-right statement, Cthulhu swims left.
There's almost no reason to speak universally to everybody. And when you do, like, the necessity of warranty on those words is so high. Why would you even want to? The fractionation is going to be obvious. It has to maintain something that's, to use a shitty word, sustainable through time. I mean,
you and Luke are saying the same thing, is that you're trying to create a state, a universal state within a state when people's norms are based by state.
Yes.
Right. So it's a natural conflict. A natural conflict.
Well, there's only conflicts on the social commons. Like there's conflicts in the real world is when groups that differ touch one another.
Yes.
Agents that differ touch one another. So either you're adjudicating a dispute, you're having a conflict, or you're cooperating with one another, or we're going, well, we're not even supposed to be in contact with one another, so let's just separate. You need to see what I said.
Luke was trying to say this because I was
I think Martin's point gets to like, well, how much pride are you going to afford people in their own echo chamber?
I mean, does anybody really object? I was doing that this morning. So what we're talking about is the problem of proximity, which is what you guys are bringing up, right? Proximity amplifies conflict whenever there are differences, and there will always be differences because all demographics need different commons, and since they need different commons, they need different norms for the commons. Now, Brandon, you just said something. I wanted to close that point, and you said something I wanted to amplify it. So go ahead. Say it again.
Martin was saying that what most people say are lies. A lot of the exaggerations is pride for the group that you're in, and it offends other groups to say it in front of them. Hey, I like my people. I like my brother more than I like you guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to say? Everyone has pride for their own people. We can't be upset with one another because we favor the people we favor. I said, what scale are you?
But does anybody object to other groups having in-group pride?
Well, everybody objects to whites having it currently.
Okay, well, that's
universally across the social commons.
Well, okay, because we're the most superior. It's okay. So let's go back. That's when always happen. But if you talk about, when we look at other people, groups, I want them to be proud. I want you to be proud of your family.
Because you want their comments to differ as much as they can, so they can add as much value as possible for one another.
Well, it's more that I want you to work for their benefit and feel joy at having succeeded at it, right? So, I mean, I look when most of us go around the world and they have their own silly customs, right? I was picking on Russians this morning, but if you look at the Russian ethic, if they weren't expansionist, it would be fine because it's just Christian nationalism. Christian fascism, really. So I mean that's alien, right? Alien's a Christian fascist, right? So it's fine as if it's not beyond your people who voluntarily want to be part of that group. The problem is when you try to expand to people who don't want to be part of that group, right? The problem we have with the Jews, of course, is that they go into a host peoples and they do it the same way that gypsies do, the same way that Muslims do. Whereas we go into host people around the world and it's like, okay, be what you are, man. You know, if I can help you though, I will. So the problem is again proximity, right? It's proximity. Now the question is, am I pulling this? You guys want to carry on a direction there, or am I trying to summarize too early?
Sounds like you're on point.
Huh?
I just say that I wasn't making a point about pride, but really about political opinions being based on false premises. So if you're going to get rid of lies, people expressing their point of view would actually often fit into lies.
Is that true? Hold on.
Yes.
Wait. If you get people to say, I am fucked, my people are fucked. Right?
You know, if you get them to say that, that's fine. But they don't usually say that. They make all sorts of excuses.
Right, correct. Well, that's
Usually
lying.
to blame someone else.
But that's
Well, everybody wants to claim somebody else is fucking them, but nobody wants to claim they're fucked.
yes. But the truth is, a lot of people are fucked. Right, and once
Yeah,
they're
but they don't want to say they're fucked by nature.
correct, they don't want to know that they're fucked by nature, because then they can't do anything about it, and that's the problem.
No, it protects you from that.
Right, there's no protection.
Culture.
Well, sometimes
Culture.
they probably could do something about it, but if they can just blame someone else, they don't have to.
That's right. The anti-colonialists in Africa. There's like two categories of Africans I deal with on a regular basis. It's the ones is, I don't care, I just want it to be better. Right? Those are good people. Then the blame people. Right? They're like, we would be if you hadn't. I'm like, dude, there's no evidence of that. The less colonialization, the worse you are, off you are. That's just fact, deal with it. Can't deal with it. You're not going to get around it.
It's the same in Ireland.
It's the same in Ireland? Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, if you ever, Irish have an incredible ability to ignore their history, which was they were the Africans of Europe, and that's how they were considered until recently.
Because Europe now has actual Africans.
What?
Because Europe now has actual Africans.
I was on a thread there to bring about a summary, and now you've just blown out. I'll never get it back in my head.
Sorry.
Anyway, what I was trying to say is there's a fourth category in content moderation, right? Disgust response, content-free offensive, falsehoods, and then just differences, point of view, right? Then the problem we have is that in point of view, it's different by group. In other words, the ethics in different countries vary. And most of these, thankfully, between, what the fuck is his name? Between Emmanuel Todd and, I can't remember the other guy's name, he's American. Starts with an H. I'll think of it a little bit. Between these two guys, they've done a good job of explaining that this is basically about family structure in relation to your polity. In other words, what in the spectrum of family to polity, And when you go to family, you go to polity, you're actually going to individual. That's what's happening, is individual responsibility. So when you go to family to polity, where is your ethic, or where is your priority between family and polity or commons? Family and commons. And so that spectrum is now something, at least there's a body of research and a body of explanations for, even though Todd is way better than the other guy. So if there's even a logic to why we vary, and why truth before face varies, and why family, tribe, nation, commons, and universal exist, why that spectrum exists. So I guess what I'd get to is, this is the question I'm asking Luke, and I'm trying to see if this resonates, is there is some set of laws of nature that at which point we're saying, well, your culture uses this weight of family versus commons, and your culture there uses this variable of truth before face versus facelessness, and your culture uses this kind of religion versus philosophy versus empiricism, right? There's some set of truths there that provide commensurability. So my argument, my question is, we know that commensurability exists, but what you're saying is, doesn't fucking matter. What you're allowing me to do is talk about it, right? And in my group, this is better. Okay,
right.
So, right? And so does that preclude us from first principles? In other words, from the measurements that explain why we have those differences? I don't think so.
No, absolutely. And I'm not suggesting that we can't, that this stuff can't be measured.
I know you weren't. I just wanted to tease it out, because I think it's an important because the answer is yeah, proximity is a fucking problem.
Right.
Because we actually live in different environments with different rules for different reasons. Right. And so your morals and mine conflict. Right.
And the only thing I want to layer on top of that is, let's say there's three groups. One group is truth before face, and two groups are face before truth, right? Of those three groups, the median in there is going to lean towards face before truth, right? So anyone targeting those three groups or engaging with those three groups, or a platform that incorporates those three groups, is going to over time lean towards the face before truth in that kind of arrangement. Now the world is overwhelmingly face before truth than it is truth before face right now. Yes. Right now, it wouldn't be a problem if all of those groups were contributing to how the platform works, or how the platform is sustained, or are paying the costs for the platform. But that's not the case right now. It's the face before truth group that's paying all the costs of the platform. They're the ones that make free speech possible, or open speech possible, or open dialogue possible. And everybody else is consuming it, but not contributing to it. So you have one group paying the cost of the existence of the platform, with all these other groups benefiting from it. And at the same time, the platform keeps leaning more and more towards the consumers rather than the producers.
Yeah, you mix two. So you mix.
Right. So the platform itself is undermining the very group that produces the platform.
Right. So what you're saying is, who always swims left? The fact they're trying to democratize this to a universal platform, or a universal commons, is tending to destroy the culture that made such a thing possible. But worse, it's destroying the willingness to use truth as a means of identifying weights and measures that explain our differences, and then therefore provide a means of resolving those differences, right? Because we're reduced to slurs, shaming, and rallying, right? If we don't have the system of measurement that gives us the ability to explain what the cause of our differences, so we know which of those differences material and which of those are arbitrary, at least in the case. So this is, what Luke is saying, and what I'm trying to tease out here is, this is fucking horrible. Social media is fucking horrible.
Yeah.
Some cultures,
but it's explainable. We can explain why we see what we see.
Right. Well, the question is, can we fix it? My argument is we can't. And there's a couple of benefits. First is that it's really a conflict of civilizations. The civilizations all use different languages, and to some degree, those languages are out there. Whenever we get to commensurability between groups, it's speaking in English, which is the language of universal commensurability, right? Law. So I mean, so as long as you're speaking to your own people in your own language, that's fine. But to amplify the problem, we are speaking to our own people in our own language, except everybody else is trying to destroy our ability to speak to our own people in our own language, which is what makes commensurability between the languages and cultures and civilizations possible. I mean, a tragedy. I mean, Lucas, you're bringing this out, but I mean, the more you look at it, the more fucking horrible it is. It's one thing just to think of the world as we're all equal, but once you realize we're the ones that are doing all the heavy lifting, we're paying the price for all the heavy lifting.
And it's and once you start seeing it, it's everywhere, right? It's the language, as you guys are pointing out. It's the social platforms. It's the world currency. It's all of these structures that are being supported by one context, but being consumed by all these other contexts that aren't participating in the supporting of it.
So you're saying it's not only burning our working classes and our lower middle class to pay for the modernization of the world, but you're saying we're actually burning our civilization.
Yes. That's what we're spending to build up the rest of the world.
Norms are the price you pay for culture.
Yeah. And we keep paying that price while exporting the culture.
Or they're the costs, excuse me, norms, because they're constant.
Right. You have to pay them to access the culture. Or you're stealing or parasiting.
That's why you need separate markets, because not everyone is fit for every market.
But isn't that what Musk is saying? He says, why doesn't China have its own filter?
Oh yeah, that's correct. They should.
Why can't white Americans have our own filter? Well, at least white non-feminist, non-liberal.
For everyone to have their own filter, there needs to be a way to adjudicate disputes when those groups touch one another.
To do that, you need a system.
Universal filter.
Well, in order to do that, you need a system of commensurability. And what
Just so happens. Just so
happens, that's what we do. But Luke is saying that without that system of measurement, that you will always degenerate.
You always favor entropy if you don't favor the storage of information.
Because
with more parsimony through time.
Yeah.
Because we can't just keep spending more energy for each unit of information that we produce. We have to become more efficient in our practice. The commensurability affords for no information loss between agents that are passing understanding and meaning between one another, because we're not being ambiguous. So either you can follow or you can't. We were talking about teaching earlier. We were talking about how it's a talent. You have to facilitate learning in your students, and you have to know the distance, how far they are from understanding a topic, and then create an analogy that has that distance from the topic.
Okay, so can I run with this one more step?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so now we've taken the Jim Roth's three categories of content. We've now added a fourth, which is truth, basically, truth and reciprocity. And we've added a fifth, which is first principles. And I think we were talking about adding sixth, which is a Wikipedia that's not false. In other words, how can you know? It's one thing to have the rule in the system. It's another thing to state the first rules. It's another thing to educate it. And it's yet another thing to tag things so that when you're reading them, you're being educated, right, about your point of view. I mean, my attitude is, let's just lay a little humor on the table now. The Islam is right about women argument. I got Luke to laugh with that, and the other two didn't do anything, right? But I mean, they're incredibly concerned because it's a family-based civilization. It's family and religion, right? That's why they can't form a fucking state to save their souls, right? So it's a family and religious-based state. It's essentially a familial and tribal civilization. So they want to preserve the family and intergenerational families and the ethics and morality of family at all costs. And so, are they wrong? Well, apparently, it's a strategy. It doesn't seem. I mean, I'm not sure about the whole headscarf thing, but well, that stuff's a little out of hand. I'm not really sure about the driving thing, although if you look at the rate at which American women cheat, I can see why the driving thing ought to be taken off the table. Come on, I'm trying to bait something here. Come on, you got to give me something. I'm trying to stir up something, and you're not giving me anything. So, and that's a choice given their strategy. Within their strategy, is it wrong? Is it immoral? I'm not. It's not. It's hard to argue against it. Our strategy is the opposite. We maximize individual responsibility in exchange for the risks of letting everyone run wild, right? With that responsibility and aggressively policing them, right? So we do something different. We direct all our energy to heroism, which directs the dominance expression to the commons, not the family. So we do the opposite. Well, our way produces more evolutionary velocity, but it also produces more risk, which is what we're talking about here because we're more vulnerable. So are they wrong? I don't know. I mean, the problem is once you understand those measures, it's not you're just wrong, right? That's your choices. That's your group's choices.
They're attempting to compete at a scale that their strategy doesn't afford for them to operate at. Meaning that they devolve the state. So Islam raids, so they're familial at a state's expense all the time.
Well, we're always making this trade-off. It's hydraulic, right? Human behavior is constant. So if you do this, you do this, you're going to get the result. So
I'm just trying to bring the real relativity of it to bear. Like you have
I see.
The globe exists as it does now. Yeah, there are consequences.
There are consequences. And so they might say, well, the consequences for our average 75, average 85 IQ civilization, where we have a long history of religiosity and tribalism, and familialism is we've been doing it for 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years. So I mean, maybe they say it's just too big of a risk for us to do anything else.
There's a universal problem of the internet bringing relative inequality and proximity to everybody. So now the Muslims in the Middle East who would like to be afforded to be self-determined or afford themselves the ability to be self-determined, they are a moral cohort of people being held back by their state.
Right, but okay, so here's the so
sure,
providing them with truth so they can make the choice is different from saying in intersocial discourse, this is what we have, and this is what the risk we're willing to take, and this is the investment our ancestors have made, my parents have made, and I want to preserve the goods of our investment. I mean, what people object to in the West is actually not Westernism. It's the Jewish integration of hedonism as a method of undermining us post-war. I mean, nobody objects to the American way pre-war. not pre-war, prior to 1960. And it's just little pink houses. Who the fuck objects to that? I mean, it's hard to object to, and that's what the rest of the world is trying to get. Is their own version of little pink houses. You know what little pink houses means? It means in the post-war period, all the soldiers could get home and get their little, they were called a national home, which were mass-produced 1,500 square foot, 1,800 square foot homes. And they were all building these developments, so all the soldiers could come back and get it. So you could come home, get married, get the GI Bill, come home, get a home loan, buy a house, build a family, right? That's what everybody wants. So what am I trying to get to here? So now the third part is that these are class-based adaptabilities, right? So if I'm a middle class and up, or lower middle class and up, in any of these cultures, I want mobility, right? Well, that's what I want. But if you're in a culture where 85% of the population is in the lower classes, do they want mobility or do they want security? If you're an East Asian, you can't fucking trust anybody. Do you want trust or do you want authority? So, I mean, these things are, I'm trying to say that I believe the social media can be on a single platform with multiple points of view. And multiple points of view is dependent upon the filtering. That doesn't mean there isn't a universal standard of measurement that explains behavior so that people can choose behavior. At least that's what I see. And I think there's value to the single platform simply because it makes it easier to use an independent comparative between the universal standard of measurement and the different factors. Because I actually want to know what its other groups live like. I mean, I find it interesting. Some of the most interesting conversations I have with Chinese people, because they're like the difference is so vast. There's not that. The surprising is you talk to an educated guy from the Middle East, it's not a big a difference. But if you talk to a very religious person from any country, it's a big difference because they double down on stasis. So anyway, have we sort of worked through this? Yes, it's Hulu swims left without the truth. The truth is a universal system of measurement that provides explanatory power. Explanatory power lets us to make differences. This is what Brandon was getting across, is which costs we want to pay for which benefits. It doesn't tell us we have to do X. It says only that we may not lie, that there is a cost for each benefit. Right? The cost for the highest benefit is what Luke brought out, which is self-regulation. Some groups want, like us, we're really good at self-regulation. Sorry, world, it's fucking genetic. You're not going to fix that one easy. It's not only cultural, but it's genetic.
It's not clear to me that necessarily Cthulhu always swims left. You can have population that's good at maintaining itself, which American population used to be. Cthulhu there was forced to the left from the top. It would never have gone so far naturally.
Well, but that's so here's the full statements. In the absence of an explicitly right, whether it's truthful, set of authority, a polity will always move left. So that in other words, I'm agreeing with you, but that's because we had an explicitly right civilization.
Yeah, but I'm saying that the opposites can also be the case, that America would never go to the left if there weren't explicitly left-wing institutions pushing
Correct.
our country.
Correct. In other words, what you're saying is once this, I don't actually know if this is true. I'm running it by you, is that if you have an explicitly right, which is maximization of individual responsibility, explicitly right polity, it will be self-maintaining. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah.
Seems to be true. So it's the problem. Here's the problem. So the problem is, by the middle class seizure of power from the aristocracy, we opened a door to undermining that was exploited by the introgression of Marxism in the lower classes, right? Because the middle class had displaced the military aristocracy. It made it possible for the left to displace the middle class. Okay, that works. You guys are pretty smart. You get paid for this almost. All right, so that was my question. The reason I'm asking all this is partly because it's coming up, but partly because Curtis Yarvin put out a piece the other day in Grey Mirror. This guy's going downhill. I don't know what he's trying to do. Go downhill real fast. On something like this, and then I'm like, no, this is crap. So he's basically saying you need an authoritarian state in order to.
That's what he was saying from the beginning, so.
It's just an admission of failure. It's the same thing. I mean, you read Carl Schmitt, and he identifies all the correct problems and comes to the wrong conclusion, which is a really common, it's just an absurdly common problem in history. I mean, Confucius is the most iconic example of correctly understanding the problem and providing the wrong solution. And you can argue it about all the failures. Anyway, all right. Well, I made that was my question of the week, which God, we had really good content here, which is how do we deal with this problem? And Luke, I think, said it best. While I can describe the problem, Luke is making the point that we're paying an extraordinarily high price for domesticating the animals. Don't sit here and wait for me to talk. I keep filling the air. I'll fill the air. But if you keep me talking like this, I'm going to devolve really quickly to hookers and cigars and alcohol.
Well, the problem isn't even that we're paying the cost, is that nobody's allowed to acknowledge that that's the case. Nobody's allowed to acknowledge that that's the price of this process.
Yes.
Which just makes it hard to do the accounting for it, or to present the accounting of it all, right?
Okay, so let's move on to the next phase then. So we've noticed that since he's come out, we've had Kanye, we've had Elon Musk, we had those commercials about anti-white come out, right, on the news. People actively running against ending white hate. So is the Overton window moving over where this becomes an open discourse? I mean, and I'm talking not about just the anti-white, but the overreach of the left, the anti-white, the impact on our civilization, and worse, the Jewish role in bringing it all about. Is that dialogue opening up?
I think as the mechanisms for measurement improve, the denial of full accounting is getting harder. Or even the obfuscation of full accounting is becoming harder, right? As it gets easier to measure all this stuff, it gets easier to account for all this stuff. So it gets harder to dismiss that accounting.
Right, the manufacturer of their manufacturer of denial seems to be sort of hitting a sandbar. I mean, I don't, that seems to be, there seems to be a resistance against their continuous denial and accusation of conspiracy theory.
But momentum is draining out of the West quickly, and now the price of all this stuff is starting to actually come out of people's wallets. And that's hard to argue with.
Okay, so what's happening is they can no longer tolerate ignoring the problem.
Right.
Which is what we've been saying since we've been working together. It's going to take the economics to will drive the change in behavior. Bart, you were going to say something.
No, not really. I was just wondering in regards to Overton window if the right way to think about it is even to think of a single window or
Right.
multiple people.
I think of it as cycles, and what you want is overlap. What you're seeing is overlapping windows, right? So the windows are beginning to overlap. So you need the economic window, you need the social window, you need the political window, you need the propaganda window. But what's happening is they're all.
Yeah, and I also mean different groups of people have different windows.
Yes.
Yeah, the Overton window is a norm, and so it should be expressed differently for each group that has a norm.
And they just by take this whole trans sexual grooming, right? The whole grooming, sexual, teach kids about sex so they can be groomed. That's fucking sick. And I can't believe, it's like once they hit moms, it was. I just had
frame that whole complex as criminal, and the trans people are still the victims. They'll be on medication for life. Those people who had those surgeries. You can't just change who you are in this place because you don't feel good about who you are. It's not even a thing. Offering it to people is a harm. They're just baiting them into dysfunction and then profiteering off of that dysfunction.
Yeah, it's vile. the medical practitioners that are involved in it, it's just vile.
Yeah, I can't comprehend that really.
I'd be happy to go back to Hammurabi on this. An eye for an eye and penis for a penis.
Well, I mean, the problem is it's unrestitutable, and it's baiting into a hazard. So it's beyond the limits of life. So the thing is, we have to make them liable for it, so that we remove the commercial incentive. Remove the commercial incentive and restore the. It's fine. I mean, if you want to go off to some, I mean, I don't know, where do people used to go somewhere weird like Switzerland to get it done back in the day. It was a weird place, and it was someplace they didn't expect. But,
keeping the exceptions keeps them safe.
yes. Luke, did I ask you the question about Marines before?
Oh, what?
there's a culture in the Marines, right? It's this.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm a big fan of this, right? So, the culture, part of the culture I like is this is all I got to work with. Right? How universalizable is that training?
From my perspective, it's very universalizable because we're not dealing with IQ 130 people in the Marine Corps, right? I mean, they're not. If you're looking at enlisting and you're evaluating the services and you're doing so from a critical standpoint, the Marine Corps is not the most intelligent choice, right? You're going after something other than, what is my best long-term potential here by choosing the Marine Corps? I mean, they're the first ones in to conflict. They're the ones that have to work with the least amount in any situation, right? So it's not, it's not that type of training, that type of mindset, that type of framing isn't dependent on high IQ for its implementation. So I think it's very.
What makes it work?
Because
you guys are all the same, in my purview, and that's a hell of a compliment.
Right. No, I didn't go through the other boot camps, so this is just what I've read about them and heard about them and things like that. So the Marine Corps does a lot more of breaking you down as an individual and then building you back up as a group than the other services do. So the big focus and the big distinction in the Marines to the other services is every Marine is expected to be a small unit leader.
Yes.
So the private in the Marine Corps is supposed to take charge of the situation if everybody above him died. That's built into the structure of how you operate and how you train and how you develop, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody in the unit or everybody in the fire team or everybody in the Marine Corps knows the mission plan so that they can step into the leadership role if needed, if the next person goes down.
So it's responsibility.
Right.
That's what I was trying to pull out, responsibility.
Yeah. But it's top to bottom responsibility. Everybody's expected to be able to step into that role and accomplish the mission.
Yes.
They know the mission well enough and are expected to take on the mission itself if it's required of them. So.
And how do you make that? I mean, I suppose I know the answer. What I'm trying to get is you just slow state. How do you make a kid know that? In other words, I know to break them down, and I know it works, right? I mean, we know.
Right.
The reason here's the contrast I make. Some people some people get really into drugs or something or crime, and they crash and bottom out, right, and then they recover, and some people don't. The difference is the Marines, military in general, but the Marines in particular, seem to be really good at constructively making you go through that process. Right.
Well,
and I just want to, it's like it's part of this thing where I'm going through. Well, I understand what therapy does, but that's actually what therapy does. It's just soft. And I'm like, well, how could we? Is this an institute? In other words, can we normalize that behavior of responsibility? And I know the answer is yes, but it's no good if I say it. And better if you say it.
Well, one of the things I took away from it is they equip every individual for that responsibility. They express the expectation of the responsibility, and they provide the opportunity to demonstrate the opportunity.
Responsibility.
Right. I mean, at all levels of training, they're cycling through leadership positions, through all the people participating in that training. They're putting everybody in a position where they have to be responsible and have to pay the costs of the failures of the group, right? So they're responsible to the group and paying the cost of the group. So everybody that they're responsible for also has that same frame. They know that if they screw up, the guy in charge is going to pay for it. And then when it comes their turn,
they're going to be
right. They're going to be held to account for whatever happens to them, right? So I mean, so they cycle through that constantly. So they equip them for it. they explicitly expect it of them, and then they provide the opportunity to demonstrate it, and they do that over and over and over again.
Now, what happens? I'm trying to think of something that doesn't show up. And what's that movie? Full Metal Jacket. Because every time I try to talk about this, that's what comes to mind because it's the first thing, right? But what happens if you get the really timid guy who's overly cautious or afraid? You can drive that out of him, right?
Yeah, and you can provide him the tools and the processes to accomplish the mission anyways, right? You can make it so those things don't hinder his ability to make decisions, to take charge, to be a leader, and to take on that role of everyman A.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, because he's going to be in a position of leadership as well during the training process. He's going to be equipped for it. The expectation of him is going to be there, and he's going to be given the opportunity to demonstrate it and correct it as he goes through that. Right? Provided direction as he goes through that. Right? I mean,
what is there a published failure rate?
I'm sure there is. I don't know what it is, but I mean, there are people that wash out. There are people that just they don't want to do it. So
okay, that's different from don't want to do it from have a nervous breakdown.
yeah, yes,
Right. I'm just wondering what because that's the limit, right? If somebody has a nervous breakdown. My problem is if you have a nervous breakdown from that, what else does that mean? I mean, so all right. So we're covering these in these conversations because this is a mutual interest, right? We're covering these aspects of education. Every aspect of education we talk about turns out to discipline, repetition, discipline, responsibility. Right?
Just training in conscientiousness.
Yeah, that's
right.
all we're doing, and everything. Whenever we talk about everything, we're training in conscientiousness to produce mindfulness. And the problem is, you've got it. Some of us got it, some of us don't. And so, but it doesn't mean it can't be trained.
The military pushes you up against the limits of your service and duty and affords you to fail and grow those limits.
Yeah.
So you're more capable of dealing with scale.
Look, if you could take my skinhead cousin. We don't have skinheads had back in the day, but this great big blonde guy with hair down to his back, who never wears a shirt. It's just work boots and jeans, right? And he's selling drugs with we didn't have tattoos back then, right? And you could take that thug, that Hitler's wet dream, and you could take that, because I mean, that's really what it is, right? If you could take that thug and put him into the Navy, and all of a sudden you've got a decent human being, I always look at it as fucking doing anything. I mean, there are some people who are just broken. I mean, they're genetically broken. It's
service to the group at your direct expense.
Yeah.
Your body can't help but feel the brutality of the training, so it's always at your body's expense.
Why did I love that shit? Why do some of us like the order? It's just some of us like the order, right? So some of us like the I don't know. For me, I like sports training too. Right?
Well, you do grow. You grow against your limits, and they increase.
I think for me, it was more that I didn't. When you're moving with a body of people, you don't feel judged. I think that was, for me, that was a big deal. I love that feeling of being part of a team.
But I think in general, organisms don't change state when they're comfortable.
Yes.
I like that I always judge myself harsher, so I like to have a group. They judge me less harsh than I do.
Yeah, I don't know what's judging. It's not being aware, not constantly monitoring your position. Maybe that's judge is the wrong word.
Oh, you're describing the freedom to remove the judging of yourself.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe that's really what it is. Anyway, all right. So we did a good meeting today. Does anybody else have any topics? I asked the question of how if you think that, I mean, we're seeing in the election the tide changing a little bit. We're seeing in the popular discourse the changing. We certainly have seen Musk change the institutional framework of it. So is there a shift going on here? Too early to tell? What's your gut? Are we when I say the Overton window, I probably mean, as Martin says, are those windows beginning to overlap?
Well, I think they doubled down. They doubled down with efficacy the last time in like 2020. So now every time they respond to reality and they double down again, everyone gets wiser through their nonsense.
But the question is, there have been these shifts before. Can they contain this again?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the shift to capture everybody digitally is obvious because the winter is going to force most people into debt. And then capturing those funds in debts and ledgers on computers is an easy task. Moving people to state-captured cryptocurrencies is trivial. And then you can't escape the economic incentives, and then you actually have to rebel in a real way. It only gets tighter for the people in case they're thinking they can hide their way out of this. A message for the people who think, fuck you, money's going to save you.
And I think one of the big signals is that we're shifting, the left politically is shifting from our opponents are wrong and bad people to our opponents are outright evil. And that's coming from the top down. So that means they're running out of any other argument.
That is a hell of a projection.
Right. It is. But but that means they've exhausted any other course that they can think of.
Correct.
When they have to go to, they're just the evil ones. So
there are those stages of genocide. I think we're in all of them now.
Right.
Not explicitly all of them, but let's milk them up.
I don't know. It's very hard to. I can't. All I can say is I can't imagine we get out of this without a civil war or both. I just can't see it. History is not very accommodating to these changes. It's very unaccommodating because even if you try to do it, let's say there's the world war ends up only being a trade war. The result's the same. The reorganization that pushes through the world, it creates just civil wars. And those civil wars will mature into world war. Or go it the other way, is the world war will destroy the trade war, which will cause civil wars. I just don't see how we get out of the problem of the fact that without America paying for the world trade system, policing it, and advancing cooperation through trade rather than aggression, I just don't see it being sustainable.
We have to be in a position to transfer people out of this, like afford to be able to transfer people out of this system currently so that they can do it on their own. I see our project as removing human nature from our existential risk set.
Okay, that you just, sometimes you jump ahead and sometimes you get on the Star Trek Enterprise and go way out in the fucking halfway across the galaxy. And I was like, where did they go? So you're going to have to explain that one.
The science of cooperation and decidability affords you to know whether or not the people around you are your enemies.
Okay.
If they are, dispose of them with a
Right, I mean,
swiftness.
but that's like, okay, do we do camps again? Is that what you're asking? Do you want to export people? Do you want to separate from people? Do you want to change the rules? They voluntarily exit? I mean, what is the solution? Because to me,
How outrageous and operational of a threat can we get away with?
and I'm at the opposite. So I'm like, we're gonna have that very scary thing. So I want to find a peaceful solution to getting there.
There's going to be an intersection of that threat and what reality is going to offer you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just trying to push the time window up.
Yeah, I know you are. Right.
People should be afraid because it's going to get tight. And you've already proven that you're unfit to maneuver about this place, given the density of information. Everyone's proven it. Because look at what they're doing. All of them. Look at what they're arguing about. Look what they're pursuing for jobs. Look at all the conflicts they're starting. I don't see competence and capability. They're children thrashing. We're upset that, well, I mean, we're excited that a couple of adults have stepped into the arena lately and said, hey, we got to be adult about this, like with a swiftness.
If anyone overreaches, we trigger it. The problem is, can we do something without overreaching?
They can't do anything without overreaching. Why don't we start there? Everything they do is overreaching. So I'm unsure that reaching in to stop them is an overreach in any instance.
Yeah.
I'm making the case as a regular. I mean, how much are people going to put up with? How much do you have to abuse their children?
Yeah, but I know, but I'm looking at the other side too, is that they're like, they just are free riding and they want a free ride and they think they've earned it. So, I mean, and they call the right nincompoops and hoodlums. So
we have the technology to offer the dysfunctional and delinquents the free ride. They have to shut up. It's the cost of the free ride.
Can I flip this again? I'm trying to get away from this. So we tend to focus too much on the left that doesn't matter. What matters is the middle. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how do we...
The middle are all credentialed.
The middle being, yeah, but you just brought up the economic. People will make rational choices when presented.
Mm-hmm.
If there's going to be some kind of separation or conflict, right? Are you going to go with the authoritarian socialist class warfare people? Or are you going to go with family and tradition, right? And rule of law? And so I'm only interested in saying, how do we get the people, in other words, that's the problem with the right. They offer solutions that are offensive to the center. Right. The answer is there are plenty of...
They're offensive because the center, the thinkers in the center, they won't say that violence is on the table. They won't say it. They can't say it. Every instance of violence in their mind is something that's bad. And it's the equilibrative force that God uses. How could it be bad? We're applying it improperly and affording for people to apply tactics in violence that are extractive through time and not stifling them with the necessary violence to put forth the imitative iteration, right, of moving through this place in the proper fashion.
I know. What I'm trying to get at is, I have no reason to believe that once people are aware that a crisis is on the near horizon, that I have no reason to believe that they wouldn't take a rational choice that would avoid that conflict. Which is why I said, why you say, and I say, because we've been over this for years now, the point is we want to accelerate the potential of conflict in order to bring about the resolution that removes the need for it. Right? That's been our strategy since, I don't know, what, 18 or 19. I mean, that's been you and me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to accelerate that. We want to, no, I mean, it's before that. It's fall of 18. So sometime, I don't know.
Been a while. The strategy in discourse is conflict brings the highs and conflict brings the resolution.
It started before the fall of 18. Like that's when I know I was definitely working on. But before then I was saying it's going to happen. And I know that in the fall of 18, it was like, we have to make it happen. Right. Right. Because I saw this. Right. And that I know you and I were talking about it sometime in there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the problem, so my view is, and I realize this is my failure always. Right. I mean, which is why I always ask the question. It just seems to me that if you propose a rational choice that solves the problem for most, and that only people we're burning are the government sector and the financial sector, and the academy, right? The academy, the cathedral complex. If we're burning the cathedral complex, it's hard for me to see why the majority middle, or the unassigned middle, because it's really a third, and a third, right? Wouldn't go along with it. I just have a hard time seeing it. Now, that doesn't mean it's, the left. Remember, the left. We talk in open voice, but the left runs around with megaphones. Right, so they're way more visible than they are in numbers. So it might be hard to capture their attention. And maybe we are right that unless we escalate, in other words, and put our demands forward, we can't trust that the middle will understand.
People don't know. They don't seem to know what's on the line. They demonstrate that they don't know what's on the line when they act every day. I mean, it's not that deep. It's not that deep of a time horizon. Like you said, we were talking about this in 2018. You know what happened between 2018 and now? The pandemic. Mm-hmm. All right, well, that's a fuck of an accelerator.
Yep. Money printing was an accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
And the war is an accelerator.
There's two. I think there's two economies here, right? There's the American economy and there's the Americans economy, right? And the Americans economy is failing, even while the American economy is exploding. By Americans, I mean the people of America.
It's insightful, but you need to disambiguate.
Right. So by Americans, I mean the people, the middle, the people that we're talking about, right? They're feeling the pinch of recession, of inflation, of all of these things going on, even while the American, the overall, this global economy that we call the American economy looks strong, right? But that's what's going to drive the middle to change what they're doing is they're actually feeling it. So, we have the cathedral, the parasite industrial complex. They're all pointing at the American, the big economy going, look, it's great. It's doing great. There's no problems here. But the lie of that is being felt by the actual people whose purchasing power, whose ability to engage in trade, in cooperation is being undermined and diminishing and devolving. Yeah, so and that's what's going to drive everything.
The deception of aggregates, right?
Right.
The deception of aggregates.
It's not our interests that they're pursuing out there. They're global.
Yeah. But they're feeling it now. They're paying for it now. It's coming right out of their pocketbook. So
Yeah, I mean, so we can't afford to run the global system anymore, right?
the people can't. The US dollar maybe can for a while longer, but the people can't.
Dollar's going to be fine.
Exactly.
That's gonna
But
be fine.
all of us using it aren't.
Well, too many of us using it. When the minute we figure out we can see and the boomers can taste the crash of their investments, of the liquid, that their investments are all inflated, then I think we'll see something. But right now, it's ordinary. I mean,
I think there's something wrong with their eyes.
This is, I'm the one that's supposed to fall into the smart people game foolishness. You guys are supposed to protect me from the smart people game. You don't have a right to go in and make the smart people error yourself. Then we're all fucked. Candace, I mean, come on. The thing, it was bad enough for me to understand the female thing, but understanding just how quickly reasoning decays, right? Just ordinary reasoning, the rate at which that decays, and with IQ, that's horrific. That
Yes.
Then you say, well, what's the ability to understand things like forecasting systems of economic and trade? I mean, you're talking about a tiny number of us,
and then they reduce with every variable.
Well,
and then they reduce with every variable.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you can't. And then the problem is that we're faced with the problem of historians don't know the difference between a pattern and a probability. In other words, that's another kind of errors of aggregate. And then you get what you're talking about now, which is the treasury through the financial sector. They're like trying to keep hope alive.
Their weights and measures are wrong.
Well, yeah. Well, but that's the thing is, you have to have a real economy. In other words, if a thing is changing in volatility, you don't know its value. If your thing is declining in value, you don't know its future value. And so when you say you have weight and measure, it's one of those things where this is why I would say production cycles matter, right? The more predictable this is what the government tries to do. The more predictable your future value of money, the longer your production cycle will be. The shorter, the more volatile your production cycle will be. Manifest by my company nearly putting out of business an Italian drafting table company back in the 80s because the lira collapsed. Well, I mean, right? I mean, we had bid it in dollars, so we got $10 million worth of stuff for $1 billion, right? Basically, from their perspective, and almost put them out of business. So I mean, so the stability of the pricing system matters. So when you say yes, well, the weights and measures are out, but what the fuck are we measuring? What, right? I don't.
Yeah, they're wrong. Not only are they measuring wrong the weights and the measures that they're using currently, they're using them incorrectly. Even if they were to use them, they're using the wrong measures.
Yeah, because what we do is we just like when we say full accounting, that the depth of that term is the way we understand it is inconceivable to the people who are listening.
To the free market people,
right? They can't even
thinking world
understand what we're talking about. When we say balance sheet accounting, we mean full accounting. We don't mean full accounting of aggregates. We mean full fucking accounting. Like if you don't know, it's one thing to not know what the sugar industry is doing or the cotton industry. It's another thing to not know what John Woe's Chinese restaurants, right? Are I'm talking about. But what I mean is individual family-owned Chinese restaurants are doing. Right? If you don't know that, or to slice the data by, why the fuck did we hollow out the Midwest by shipping shipping trade overseas, and we have the lowest cost internal transportation network in the world. I mean, what the fuck? That was stupid. I mean, just how many things do we do wrong because of measuring aggregates, not for doing full accounting? Well, the argument they would say is, well, we didn't have the technology before. That's no reason to say you don't have it today.
Correct.
I mean, the one argument for digital money is we could have the information to do that. I mean, I don't mean we should replace cash, which is what some of them want. I don't like that idea at all. But the value of digital money in business is be able to actually have sufficient knowledge about the economy that we can fully account for it without being misled by pretentious aggregates that are optimistic. You know, it's like the whole thing of how much the stock market is driven by FANG. You know, I mean, it makes the aggregate look great.
Yes.
I mean, theoretically, we ought to do, if we repatriated all these industries we've shipped overseas since 1970. Fucking A, man, that would blow our economy out the roof. It would also increase our prices. So what?
Well, it's the only thing that will position us to help the rest of the world through what's coming.
Yes. So
The only thing is to reorganize here first.
I mean, nobody cares if the price of this mouse goes up 20% because it's cheap already. You don't need to eat these, right? We care. You do care about the price of eggs,
Yes.
and I care about the price of chicken, right, and beef. And I'm like, wow, that was got out of hand for a while, but now it's back, right? That's those things we care about. And a lot of, we use the price of bread, milk, eggs. Eggs were like $7 a dozen for a while there. Usually I pay $1.35 or something, right? I mean, if I was lazy enough to drive down the street to the fucking farmer's market, God knows what I'd pay for. Except around here in the Northeast, they're probably organic and they cost 6 times as much. God knows. So people don't, well, there's a lot of things we say which we understand. We say full accounting, which just means enumerated, right? They have no we mean full accounting, we mean fucking full accounting because we're trying to prevent people from lying. Well, how do they lie? Aggregates is another word for conflation, isn't it? I mean, isn't that the same word?
Yes.
Isn't statistics?
And ambiguation.
Isn't that what a statistic means? It's an ambiguation. I mean, you could use statistics and then preserve, let's say, the quintiles, right? Or when they say Americans think, I mean, which Americans?
Never us.
It's never us. It's like if you look at the population map as a height map in the United States, you see this great vast tower in Los Angeles, and another one in Newark, New Jersey, New York, and a couple of others like around Chicago and stuff. And so what you're saying is people in these 5 cities believe this. They don't break it down by these are the 9 nations of North America. These are the classes, the income thing, and these are the age distributions. And this is what it looks like. So, if they did that, then we'd have honest numbers. But what economists do? They have to go into the federal database, which is open to the public. You download a bunch of spreadsheets. They have to guesstimate that shit. And since they launder race out of it, right? You start to lose things like, well, I mean, of course, because it's, Louisiana's Louisiana, Alabama, or they're stuck with St. Louis, right? I mean, or Illinois looks like shit because of Chicago. So, I mean, conversely, go ahead.
Once again, I don't think any of this is an error. That you can probably find a lot of people in whose self-interest it is to not do full accounting.
Oh, they do it on purpose. You're right, exactly. They don't. the proposal was that if we were going to do income tax, etc., we actually keep a balance sheet per person, which is what we'd like to see, right? We want to know. Well, the reason they didn't do it is because only 10% of the population would actually be contributing. Right? If you white males over 35.
The voters, the voting bloc.
Right. So they say, well, why do these people vote if they're net tax consumers?
That would be the case that the 10% made when they saw the data.
Right, because the reason we got for enfranchisement was that we're taxing people now. Right? So now we're giving representation, except that they're net, they aren't, if you're a net tax burden, you're not a net tax contributor.
That's been it. That those people need the vote so they can vote for more opportunities, so they can start contributing.
I just remember voting when I was 18, right? I was so happy to be able to vote. I remember it vividly, you know, the machine, the curtain, the big levers, because we used to have big levers. Because I'm older, I'm an old fuck, and you guys aren't an old fuck, but I'm an old fuck. So now I get to be proud that I'm an old fuck, right? I'm technically almost a senior citizen. So, you know, I could pull out the levers, and I was so proud of myself. But, you know, I spent the rest of the day saying, I'm not really sure what I just did. Right? Because you really don't know what your vote means. So my father said, do it. You got to do what everybody else does. You feel a basic bias for one part or the other, and just pull the party lever, which is what a lot of people do, right? Or my favorite one is they like someone's name, or they like his picture. The number of women who vote because someone looks nicer is fucking horrifying.
Or what Eli does. First make sure it's a white male and then start considering the other things.
Yeah, I would, that's true, but I mean, you know, I'm in New England, that means 90% of white males are fucking paws. So I mean, what's the point? You know, I might as well just vote the ticket.
It
was easier.
I recognize the futility of it now too much to keep voting.
When I was living in Seattle, one of the radio stations put out the best voting pamphlet, right, online, and they would tell, and so you would say they didn't care what party you were from or whatever. It was like, vote for this person, vote for, and we had a lot of initiatives in Washington, this initiative state. So you got, and I thought that was fucking valuable. I just can't figure out why that's not done more often, because it used to be in the papers, but they got paused. All right, so I feel like we're running out of 10, 11, 12. Yeah, we're running 2 hours now. All right, so any other business, any other thoughts? No? All right, well, I had a good time today. I learned a lot. Thank you very much. Very educational. You guys have a wonderful day.
You too. Good to see everybody.
Yeah,
Love, guys.
Likewise.
try not to light anything on fire, cough or anything. Yeah,
These are trying times. We make no promises.
Yeah, I was going to send Luke a message. He hasn't disparaged my problem with women lately, so I need to have a conversation with Luke so that I could feel like I was kept in check. Anyway, I love you guys. You have a great day.